Hi, my name is Dr. Moira Hennessy. I'm a clinical psychologist working with the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative. My work focuses on the experience of trauma and resilience in humanitarian and non-humanitarian settings.
Hi, I'm Maggie Jarmolowski, and I'm a clinical social worker, and I also work for the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative. I'm a psychotherapist, lecturer, and consultant specializing in working with people and communities impacted by trauma. We're really excited to be here with you today because we have a special interest in supporting the humanitarian population in developing tools for psychological resilience for the sustainability of your important work and overall well-being.
The psychological dimension of humanitarian crises and disasters is profound and wide-reaching. A continued area to better understand and explore in this domain is the psychological aspect of working or leading in humanitarian settings. Research shows that psychological resilience and emotional intelligence are essential components for effective leadership. This is especially the case when we're working in humanitarian settings, where our work, by definition, involves frequent exposure to stressors, great uncertainty, rapid changes, and exposure to frequent, potentially traumatic or threatening events. And this is especially the case for those of you who are local or national staff members who typically work and live near or around high stress or crisis areas. Resilience has many definitions, but broadly, resilience refers to the capacity of an individual, organization, community, or population to adapt successfully to changes that threaten the system's functioning, survival, or development in some way. The way we express or experience resilience varies from person to person and across cultures or situations, but in general, resilience refers to any experience of bouncing back from or growing in response to adversity. Do take a moment and pause and check in with yourself and see, for you or your culture or setting, does resilience look a certain way? Perhaps a word or image or description comes to mind that highlights what resilience means to you. Feel free to pause the video here and write down your thoughts for future discussion. There's a few important things to know about resilience. One is that it's actually quite ordinary. It's not extraordinary. We can expect to see evidence of resilience in almost any disaster or crisis situation. Also, just like leadership, resilience is not a trait. It's something that's practiced and can be learned, and it involves a series of behaviors and actions and thoughts that can be developed and enhanced in all of us. And very, very importantly, resilience does not mean that a person is not experiencing difficulty or distress in the face of a stressor or threat. This is a common misperception. In fact, being resilient often involves having strong reactions and being able to tolerate or manage them. In fact, as you continue to progress in your careers in the humanitarian field, you will be faced with managing more and more stressors, and you will have reactions to those experiences. Listening to those reactions and using those reactions as information or data about what the situation or individuals in this situation need is critical for resilience. It gives us the information that allows us to connect to capacities or networks that set us on a positive trajectory towards more functioning and enhanced adaptation. Many different features contribute to resilience. On the level of the individual or leader, studies show the following components are associated with high levels of resilience. Those factors include having strong and supportive relationships, exercising strong communication and problem-solving skills, using a strength-based or positive view of challenges and having confidence in one's own abilities, and being able to make realistic plans and take steps to follow them. These are essential components for resilience, and it's noteworthy that these are often the skills that we associate with strong managers or individuals who are in roles of positional authority. However, there's an additional component that's critical for resilience, and in fact is the key that unlocks our ability to connect to these other components that we've been talking about, and that is the capacity to tolerate or manage strong emotions. This piece is so often overlooked and undervalued, but it's so, so important because when we are responding with resilience, we're almost always in highly stressful situations that are going to elicit a strong emotional response for us. So if you do not have a capacity to sit with those, you're not then going to be able to access the rest of your skill set and then be able to respond in the most adaptive way possible. Having feelings isn't the problem. Knowing what to do with them is a different question. None of us are immune to stress or strong emotions. So let's begin building skills for resilient leadership by first understanding what happens for all of us in our nervous system when we're under stress.
In order for us to develop tools to respond to our strong emotions when we experience stress or threat, we need to first understand and notice what's happening in our body and how it's always working to take care of us and ensure our survival. It begins with our nervous system. This pathway made up of our brain, our spinal column, and our nerves throughout our whole body that sends and receives information both about what's happening inside of our body and also in the environment. Its highest priority is our physical safety, and we are wired to bypass the parts of our brain that are capable of complex thought but are much more clunky and slow, for structures that can act quickly, frequently without conscious thought, to keep us safe when we perceive threat. Often we perceive this threat even outside of our conscious awareness. Instead, the older, more evolutionary-based parts of our brain take over and make decisions within seconds at times when it would be harmful to reflect and ponder the best course of action with our more sophisticated brain structures. For example, if I step into the street at a moment when a car is coming around the bend, and I stop, and I look, and I assess for how quickly the car is coming, and can I get out of the way, or maybe I can get to the other side, it might be way too late before I decide and thus incur some harm. Instead, I don't even need to fully look at the car. And there's a split-second moment of assessment before my nervous system communicates that I need to jump back from the curb and out of harm's way. To break this down, when we perceive threat, there's typically a moment of constriction when our bodies freeze. Our muscles are tense, but we have a high level of arousal and activation in our nervous system as it assesses our next steps. Depending on this assessment, the hyper or the hypoarousal systems become activated to help us fight, flee, hide, or reduce pain from injury. Hyperarousal is commonly known as the fight or flight response, meaning that the nervous system is preparing our bodies to do these actions. In the event that we assess that the fight or flight response is our highest chance of survival, our heart rate increases, pumping more blood away from our internal organs and sending it to our limbs. Our breathing and our muscle tone increases. Our eyesight sharpen. Our orientation turns outward such that we can run or fight and maximize the endurance and strength and continue to identify danger. With this knowledge, how might we view a demanding and irritable colleague in the immediate aftermath of a traumatic event? As we identify this as hypoarousal, how does this change our perception of our colleague?
In contrast, if that split-second appraisal tells us that we are not going to be able to escape the threat, the system prepares us for being injured or killed. We actually turn inward and try to become invisible or try to focus our energies on managing the pain associated with the possibility of injury. In this circumstance, our heart rate decreases, our blood flow moves away from our limbs because we don't have to fight or flee any longer, and our blood flow is prioritized around our most essential organs to increase our likelihood of survival. The body releases natural painkillers to manage pain or discomfort, and the orientation turns inward, and the focus is only on what's necessary for survival rather than continuing to notice the environment around us.
The hallmark of a healthy nervous system is one of flexibility. All day long, we're getting a little bit activated, a little bit more regulated, up and down, up and down. If I see the bus and I know I need to catch it and I'm running late, my sympathetic nervous system kicks in, my heart rate increases, my blood flow goes to my legs, and I run and run and run, and I am able to catch that bus. Once I'm on the bus and I want to read my book, my parasympathetic nervous system can kick in and re-regulate me such that I'm able to sit and focus and read. As I do this, I stay in my optimal range of fluctuation, and I have access to most of my resources, and it allows me to adapt to the environment. This optimal range is commonly referred to as the window of tolerance.
In addition to this normal fluctuation of activation and calming that happens all throughout the course of the day, where we're staying inside of our optimal zone or window of tolerance, having access to all of us, our thinking brain and our more automatic brain structures. In addition to this typical fluctuation, throughout the course of the day, it's also quite normal to expect that from time to time we're going to experience a stressor that kicks us out of our window of tolerance and into a more severe experience of hyper or hypoarousal. And this happens normally throughout the course of the day, but typically our nervous system will just help us regulate down and get back into our window where we can again access all of ourselves. So let's imagine we're back on the bus that we were talking about a moment ago. If you're on the bus and reading your book and all of a sudden you hear tires screech and the bus comes to a sudden stop and you fall out of your seat, what might happen? You might first have an experience of hyperarousal where you're kicked outside of your window and you're feeling very anxious. You're having racing thoughts. You're noticing everything around you in order to better understand what's going on and how can you cope with it. But then as you fall to the ground and feel the ground under you and perhaps wonder, did I get hurt? The hypoarousal system can kick you back down through your window to the other side, where you can turn inward and be very still, not noticing much, just focusing within and checking in with yourself. Am I okay? Should I be still? Should I get up? And if a stressor is, reasonably safe, like in this circumstance, someone came along and helped you back to your seat, you might make conscious choices to sit down, take a few deep breaths, and then return to this optimal zone, the window of tolerance, where you're able to realize, my stop is up next. I better get ready to get off of the bus. Okay? In contrast, though, if a threat or a stressor is severe enough or repetitive enough, our reaction can kick us out of the window of tolerance and we can get stuck on one side or the other. Getting stuck outside of our zone is what we typically associate with post-traumatic responses. And when we get stuck, that means that our body is using a coping orientation that was helpful for the moment, but is no longer helpful. So for instance, if someone had been in a bus accident before, and then they experience this rather mild experience on the bus, they might shut down, but stay quite shut down for hours or days, not being able to focus in the same way they usually do, not feeling as much feeling as they usually do, until they get an opportunity to get regulated back into the window. And the challenge with humanitarian settings is the threats or the stressors are so severe and so frequent that there's a lot of potential for us to get ourselves stuck on one side or the other. So part of our job in leading with resilience is to better understand and recognize when we or others are jumped out of our optimal zone of functioning and tolerance, and then assist ourselves or others in becoming re-regulated, connected to ourselves and connected to others. Now that we have a shared understanding of nervous system reactions to stress, let's take a moment to pause and reflect on how we experience this material. Feel free to pause the video after each reflection question and jot down your thoughts and associations. They might be helpful for future discussion and thinking more critically about your own reactions to stress and how you want to work with them more effectively.
So let's start with your body. What types of stressors create a strong stress response for you or others that you've observed at your work?
For some people, acute stressors like a crisis or a situation of unsafety is overwhelming to deal with. For another person, they respond to that with a lot of ease. For someone else, daily stressors that are chronic and ongoing just really wear someone down, and they have a really hard time rising to meet those. Typically, we find that there's certain types of stressors that are easy for us, especially if you work in the humanitarian sector, and others that really stress our system more. When you are under stress or threat, do you typically react more in a hyper-aroused continuum or hypo-aroused continuum? Or are you a person who switches pretty evenly between both?
For some people, they might notice that they get a little foggy-headed or spacey, or all of a sudden all their motivation is gone. This might be an example of the hypoarousal continuum. For others, they report feeling anxious and angry and irritable and find that really confusing. And this might be an example of the hyperarousal continuum. For others, we might notice, oh, this morning I was feeling really revved up but positive, and now I'm noticing after that one setback, I'm really noticing that I'm feeling a bit more hopeless and depressed. And this might be an example of these two systems coming on board for you. How do you help yourself or others regulate or cope when outside the window of tolerance? Do you find it easier to help yourself or others regulate up or down? Do you notice that potentially you need a little bit more activation when you're having a hard time? Or are you the kind of person who craves relaxation or calm?
Sometimes I think about the fact that some people we work with really seem to cope by tackling a problem and getting really excited about it. So these are people who cope by regulating up. And other folks we work with often will take a step back, work independently on their work and focus in on the details. And very often those are people who cope by regulating down. In the past in your work, have you noticed your own stress reactions and responded to them in an adaptive way? Or has it been something that's really just been happening in the background? Also, do you typically notice and respond to the stress of the people you work with, like members of your team or folks that you supervise?
I know for me, I notice that when I'm working with people who have a lot of activation, I start to get worried if something is going wrong. And so I've started to notice that I need to take a step back, maybe take a walk, and then remember, oh, this is my body and this is my experience, and I don't have to join theirs. But I really have had to work on it because for many, many, I think, years, I used to always get really, really stressed out and activated when other people were also exhibiting kind of more hyperarousal.
Right. So this is an example of the benefit of making a practice of noticing other people's stress response. You know, human beings are impacted by other people's stress responses. We're
designed to.
We're designed to. And we borrow each other's nervous systems sometimes when we need. So stress reactions sometimes can be contagious. So if you notice what stress responses folks on your team or around you are having, you're better able to not only support them, but also take care of yourself, as you just described.